Hello everybody and welcome back to another video on my channel. This time we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Instead of an event recap, for the first time, we are actually going to be doing a bot teardown and damage report. So I'm just going to show you my 3-pound robot Syrnik. I'm going to show you all the damage that it took in its recent event at Utah in May. And then I'm going to do a quick teardown, show you all the electronics, show you the materials, and just in general how it's put together. So yeah, let's go. Alright, we're going to start off with a quick damage report, and there wasn't a whole lot of damage that it took during its event, so this isn't going to be a huge teardown for damage. It's just going to be a quick showing, and then we'll move on to the actual teardown of the electronics and materials. So let's just start top to bottom of the robot, starting with the disc. As you can see, the teeth on the disc are not as sharp as they used to be. They sustained some pretty significant damage chewing up other robots. But other than that, the disc functions fine and it still spins pretty freely. Moving on to the wedge supports, not the wedge supports, sorry, the weapon supports, you can see they're completely bent to the side, and that is courtesy of Billy. And if you want to see that fight, you can go to my other video on my channel, which I will put to link into the description for that. He hit me very hard on the side of my weapon and bent the whole thing over like this, and surprisingly, somehow, it is still freely spinning. So that's something. I didn't expect that to be able to happen, but it did. Alright, moving on to the wedges. These are 1.5mm titanium wedges, and as you can see, just a few nicks taken out of them from some, I think, egg beaters. And also, you can tell they don't sit entirely right, and that is because the whole frame was bent because of that one Billy hit. So, now the wedge doesn't sit straight, even though it still drives kind of alright. Moving on to the top armor. It's duct tape. The top armor is duct tape. I ran out of weight, and I decided, hey, red duct tape, what could be better than that? And surprisingly, it held up well. There was no major damage to the duct tape, and no major damage to my electronics, somehow. So that was lucky. Moving on. The side panels, these got scratched by a fight with a robot called Roadkill. He was a horizontal cutter, and he scratched that there. I had some scratches from other egg beaters here, like Rack Attack, Wedgie Steel Max, Little Mac II. Those are all fights I had with vertical spinners. And then the final big bit of damage is right here on the frame. And this was during the rumble. If you can tell, right at the beginning of the rumble, I got flipped over on my head. And I'm not invertible. And somebody came over, I forget what robot it was called, and he hit me right here and bent this piece of frame down, and then I landed back on my feet and I was able to continue the rumble. And surprisingly, I was still able to drive after that because my ground clearance is excessively large. And other than that, there's not a whole lot of damage. You know, the electronics were never compromised, the bot kept running the whole event except for a battery failure in the rumble. So yeah, that's about it. Let's move on to the teardown. Okay, so now we're going to do a teardown of the robot. So let's just start with a bill of materials. We've got a 1/2-inch thick AR500 disc. We have 1.5mm thick titanium wedges. We have, I believe, 0.06-inch thick aluminum base plate with onyx side ring going around it, courtesy of NBOSS Robotics. And the red material on the outside is Flex Seal. Because why not? You know, nothing's better than Flex Seal, everybody knows. That's the best armor that you could possibly have for a robot. The weapon supports are UHMW, I believe. CNC machined UHMW. The weapon pulleys, this pulley and this pulley, are also onyx, same material as the side bit. And so are these wheel supports in here. They are also onyx. Let's see, other than that, there's not a whole lot to the robot. You know, it's just those few materials, and that's about it for materials. Alright, so moving on to some mechanisms. The weapon system works by having these two uprights here. And I'm not going to take it apart because it literally takes 15 minutes to unscrew this thing by itself, and I am not going to deal with that. So, essentially how it works, we have a shaft running through here that goes on top of this screw. and that shaft runs through these, and it's fixed in place. It's a dead shaft. And then on that shaft, we have these running on a bearing. So basically, it's a dead shaft with a live bearing that this spins on and is driven by this motor here that runs on a 1-to-1 ratio because I'm lazy and didn't feel like gearing it down, which was a mistake because I didn't have enough power to spin this up reliably. And that also caused the motor to stick up out of the robot. You know, as you can tell, it sticks up in a weird way, so I want to fix that in the next iteration. But the belt held up fine. The weapon kept spinning the whole round, even though it didn't spin up as fast as I wanted it to. The wheels held up fine. You know, foam FingerTech wheels, classic wheel, can't get much better than that. Saves your motors. And that's about it for bill of materials. I'm going to take all these electronics out now, and I will show you how they work. Right, so moving on to the electronics, and as you can see, I took a lot of time organizing these electronics to make sure there was no possible way that it could look like somebody spilled a plate of spaghetti directly into the internals of my robot. Anyway, I'm just going to take all these out, because I already unplugged it all after the fight. I'm just going to, you know, I shouldn't have done, I need those why am I, alright, anyway, let's start with the motors. So I'm running on brush drive. These are 1000 RPM motors from Nbots. I believe they're called Lightning Gearbox motors. They're brush motors, and they run off these brushed ESCs. They're Scorpion Mini ESCs. I really liked having them. They're described as bulletproof by others, and I haven't had a problem with them yet, so I'll believe that. And that runs on both sides, so 2 of those motors and 2 of those ESCs. I am running brushless motor for this, obviously, because it's got to go a little bit faster. And that runs off of, where's my brushless ESC? Here it is. That runs off this 30 amp Turnigy ESC running on BLHeli-S. Again, no complaints with this. It worked fine. I had no issues with it. But next time I do want to upgrade this motor to a 2836, and this is a 2826, so that's about this long. 2836 is about this long, just has a little more power to it. Moving on to my receiver. Here's my receiver. That's just, you know, FlySky FSI 6 receiver paired with my transmitter, which is somewhere because I probably lost it, which I tend to do with everything. Again, no complaints with it. It works great. It's a classic receiver. Pretty much everybody uses it, so I'm not going to go into much detail with that. Finally, we have our battery eliminator circuit. Because my brushless ESC does not have a battery eliminator circuit built in, I had to use a separate one. And this, if you didn't know this, just takes power from your battery and it pumps it into the receiver so your receiver can have power and, you know, transfer signals to the rest of the robot. And finally, we have our power distribution spaghetti monster thing right here. Basically, we have our battery plug right here. And then all the other bits plug into these. As you can see, every little thing has a plug like this. These plug into here, so the battery goes in here, turn the switch on, and it distributes power to all the other electronics, including the receiver. And then we have our indicator LED to show that we have power, and there's an RGB LED from FingerTech Robotics. Again, I use a lot of stuff from there. And once again, it worked fine. It was like a disco party in my robot. 10 out of 10, would recommend. And that's about it for electronics. Alright, so now moving on to what I want to improve for Syrnik V2. And there are 2 main things. Well, I guess 3 main things. Drivability, weapon reliability, and invertibility. So first of all, let's start with invertibility. As you can tell, if I put the phone here, the wheels don't stick up above the robot. It's not going to drive inverted. And if you saw the fights, my last 2 fights of the day with Syrnik, it flopped over on its head, and it couldn't get back up. Because that's the way I designed it. So I want to put the wheels here. I want to make them go from here, move them back around to here, so that when it's flipped over, the wheels will still make contact with the ground, and it can drive inverted. And you're probably wondering why I didn't do that in the first place. Well, that's because of center of gravity. If the center of gravity of the robot is right over the wheels, that means it's going to drive really well. And this is pretty much as good as it's going to get with CG. Although it's a little bit forward for the wedges so they can make contact with the ground, it drives very well, and I'm happy with that. But the problem is, in order to make this invertible, the wheels would have had been absolutely gigantic. So what I want to do is I want to trade CG and a bit of drivability for invertibility, and I feel like that's a worthwhile trade. Next up is drivability in general. I want to replace these brushed systems with brushless systems. It's essentially the same. It's just a motor like this that's and you slap a gearbox on it, and it has more power for less weight. It's a good trade-off, and it's a little more expensive, which is why I didn't implement it in here, but I feel like it's, at this point, that's what I want to do with Syrnik. So now moving on to the final thing I want to improve, and that is the weapon, not durability, I guess, because the weapon ran fine. It's more weapon speed and weapon reliability. So what happened here is, in the final fights, I found that it was having a hard time spinning up, and it took a really long time for it to spin up to full speed. So the main thing that caused this weapon to not be able to spin up fully in the last few fights was the fact that there just wasn't enough torque coming out of this motor. And the way to fix that is by gearing it down. So right now, for every one rotation of this, I have one rotation of this motor. But I want to put a smaller gear here to a bigger gear here, which means I will have more torque on this motor, more torque on the weapon to spin it up, and a little less speed. But I'll fix that by having the motor be twice as fast. So we'll be having essentially the same speed with more torque, and that should allow me to spin up much faster. Alright, well that is about it for this video. If you liked this new format, please let me know. If you didn't like this format, and you think I should just stick to what I've been doing before, which is event recaps, also let me know. And that's about it. Thank you for watching.